Hey guys, it's Jonathan McCormack. You can find me at attachmenthealinghelp.com. I'm an attachment specialist, and today we're going to talk about sex, physical intimacy, particularly in the context of what you can expect in a long-term relationship, specifically how different attachment styles will affect that in, say, a marriage. This is based on Sue Johnson's work. Two people, Sue Johnson, John Gottman, and they cover everything. And boy, Sue Johnson wrote Love Sense. Everything I'm going to say here is in that book, and I've been doing a series of videos. I did the brain last time, and it's kind of like the body, you know. I think Shakespeare once said, tell me where is fancy bred, in the heart or in the head. And a lot of scientists will say the head, but some of us put some of it a little lower in the body. I think Harlan Ellison said love ain't nothing but sex misspelled. Well, I can tell you that it's the emotion, it's the quality of our connection to another person that defines the type of sex you have with them. That defines the satisfaction you'll derive from it and the impact it will have on your relationship. That all depends on how connected you are to the person. Attachment determines how you behave in bed, Unfortunately, in this society, sexual infatuation and love are kind of synonymous, And when we think, what is adult love as opposed to little kid love? Well, sex, that's the big difference. And it translates to many people that sex is love, and good sex is good love, That's false. That's not true at all. Today, I think we're obsessed with it, By the way, the best sex is orgasmic. I know this because every magazine and television show has been shouting that at me. Pick up any, I saw, I think it was Cosmo or something at the line, and it was like, oh, ladies, does your O face turn him off? And I just thought, good Lord. Talk about making someone self-conscious. Give yourself a break there, ladies. Just you be how you're going to be. Forget what he thinks in that moment. I mean, the amount of pressure we put on this is insane. And vaulting sex to such primacy, it's distorted its role in relationships. And it's been harmful. I get it. We want to get rid of oppression and all that guilt. But instead of drawing people together, this emphasis on sex has really driven us apart, Adult love has three elements. Sexuality, of course, caregiving, and attachment. That's what an adult relationship is. Caregiving, it's a blend between being attentive and empathetic. Attentive to your partner and empathizing what they're going through with. That's the main feature. And I can tell you, attachment by far is the most important. By far. Because as you connect emotionally, that's how you connect sexually. The level of ease and closeness, the degree of safety you feel with your partner, that will translate into different types of sex, each with its own goals. And in fact, our attachment style even directs our fantasies, So we can have sex that centers on physical sensation, and that's walled off from our heart, from our emotional life. We can do that, You can have sex that's mainly emotional consolation. Anxious people do that, right? For soothing, to get some solace, for comfort, right? Avoidant people, it's just about the pleasure. Anxious people, it's about the comfort. Secure people, well, it's, you two are in sync. Yeah, synchronous. It's intimate, and it's integrated with your deepest emotional needs. You guys are in sync, attuned to each other, you know. I remember, so I was at a tango dance, and I got tired. I'm just sitting down, watching everyone. A very attractive couple. In fact, these guys are like models. This girl and the guy get up there, and they start dancing. And it was one of the most awkward things on the planet. I mean, it just was. They were kind of like, you can see they're both anxious. They're trying to anticipate the other person. It was not fun, you know. Then I saw a couple with normal human bodies, like 30 pounds overweight. These guys were like in the late 30s. The guy was bald. These were not super attractive people, but my Lord, it was one of the most erotic things I've ever seen. Just the way they were moving. And what made it like that is they were so in sync with each other, you know. It was like their bodies were having a conversation. He was so attuned, she was so attuned, and the world disappeared, and they were playing. They were playing. I could tell they were having fun, you know. And that's what it ought to be, sex. It ought to be a form of play, you know, just absorbed in the other, savoring them, sensuous, but in sync, you know. Sex simply follows connection, you know. Our culture seems to endorse the idea that sex brings emotional attachment, you know, that it creates the bond that ties people together. You know, in other words, love follows sex. I've heard this from a lot of women. Well, I won't tell them, like, you know, guys, they have to have sex first to see if they're in love, you know. Actually, it's much more significant in the other direction, though, that love leads to sex, much more, especially the past 15 years, that your attachment, secure, anxious, avoidant, it actually influences your motives for having sex. One good idea is to write down your motives and then share it with your partner and see what their motives are. It has a huge impact on our performance or satisfaction, you know. So the way this manifests is avoidant people. Avoidant people who have avoidant attachment, they're very uncomfortable with emotional closeness. Very uncomfortable depending on others. They have what Sue Johnson calls sealed off sex. When they're with someone, they're focused on their own sensations, you know. The sex is self-centered, it's self-affirming, you know, and they have sex. Why? So I can feel good about myself. Look at that. It's about performance. It's achieve orgasm, climax. That's why you're doing it, you know. Technique is prized. Openness, vulnerability, no. Foreplay, no, that doesn't happen. Not with an avoidant, absolutely not. No kissing, no cuddling. Boom, it's over. And now any of your partner's feelings are dismissed. Well, I could tell you that that type of sex needs, because it has no emotional engagement, is very shallow and fleeting. So it needs continual boosting, continuous novelty, always a new thrill, new techniques, you know. That inevitably, if you're with someone like that sealed off sex, it's so one-dimensional, it'll actually both of you not more connected. You know, a lot of times we have said we're more connected. Now with an avoidant, often the opposite happens. It leaves both people feeling disassociated. It undermines emotional bonds, and it's not very satisfying, you know. Believe it or not, research I've seen actually reduces arousal, the less emotional engagement. That results in less orgasms, you know. And unless you can attune to the other person, you know, and live that emotional music, it's going to get boring, and emptiness is going to follow. Now, oftentimes people get involved with an avoidant, and this sex is wonderful. Why? They're not self-conscious. Frankly, they couldn't care less what you feel. And that's very attractive. They know what they want. They ask for it. They get it. They can be very dominant. Okay. But what happens is after a few months, it just disappears because the emotional life has zero effect on an avoidance, and whether they have sex or not. Zero effect. It doesn't matter. In fact, whether they have sex or not doesn't even impact their emotional state. So most people, when they have sex, good sex, the next day they're feeling good, right? They're in a good mood. You can kind of tell. They got a little step. They maybe if you're a man, you're very, very relaxed, and everyone can kind of tell. Like, this guy's pretty relaxed. Something happened. He's in a good mood. But no, it has no emotional effect on an avoidant at all. And after a couple months, they can stop really caring. They just don't care about sex anymore. I mean, it'll just dry up, and your partner will be very confused about that. I've done some schooling in sexology, so you learn all these techniques. And the avoidant men would always ask me, how do you do this? How do you do that? How do you give a full body blah, blah? How do you do a tantric? Oh, okay, I'll show you. And then when you're done, a couple weeks later, she's going to be bored as hell with you, and you'll be bored in hell also. Nothing will happen. Techniques are not long-lasting. They're exciting things. They're like candy for kids. That does not lead to hot sex or satisfying sex. Rather, vulnerability does. Anxiously attached people, they usually have sex for comfort. Sue Johnson calls it soulless sex, for solace, for comfort. And they have a purpose. Again, I say, like, one good thing you do is write down, why are you having sex, And if you ask an anxious person, a lot of times you get an answer, as proof of how much I'm loved. You notice I work with a lot of guys that just got out of prison or out of rehab. And the first thing they do, they get laid. Why? Because they feel good about themselves. Someone cares about them. They're at least attractive enough that some woman chooses them. And they feel so low and bad about themselves. They're just not secure. They're riddled with insecurities. And they need that for proof. Now, with anxious people, there is emotional engagement. But I could tell you, the chief emotion is anxiety. Why? Because an anxious person is so hypervigilant. They're always scanning for rejection. Because the sex serves as a reassurance that they're valued and desired. Like if you want to have sex, I'm valuable. I'm worth something. Well. If you're obsessed with your partner, is my partner enjoying this? Do they not like it? Now are they looking at me? Am I supposed to? Should I have said? Can they tell I'm not into it? Well, the more hypervigilant you are, the more anxious. The less in tune you're going to be. Anxious people do not make good lovers, despite the fact that they try really, really hard. And I have a lot of anxious people ask me, even, what are guys like? Would you like this? Would you like that? Tell me how a guy thinks. And that's the problem, obsessing about the other person. Anxious people will never tell you what they want in bed. What do you like? Oh no, they couldn't tell you that because they don't want to be judged. Too much anxiety. Okay, well, I don't know what you like then. For men, it usually is the sex that gives comfort. But for women, it's not the sex. I'm generalizing. But there are good studies on this. It's actually the kissing and cuddling before and after. So one of the very first things I tell guys, like, okay, 20-20 rule, 20 minutes warming her up. And then when you're done, 20 minutes of cuddling. And after the act, you hold her, you ask her how her day was, how she's feeling, and you just give her the gift of your attention. And I know wives that really don't even like sex with their husband. But the moment I start doing this, I tell them to do it, all of a sudden she's more into it. Why? She doesn't care about the sex. She just wants to be held and to be talked to be whispered at. That's what she wants. And she'll do the sex thing to get that. these people are just so hypersensitive that they jump to conclusions. And if you talk to them, and I've dated girls like this, and it's like, oh, I don't know why you find me attractive. You're gorgeous. What, you kidding me? I don't know why. I'm not that pretty. I don't know. I don't see myself that way, what do I want in bed? I don't know. I don't even know. I just want to please you. Okay. Well, that's like I'm in a relationship to myself. That's hardly relational, and just this obsession. You're not attractive. You're this. Why do you like me? It's a turn off. But also, I don't know what to do with it. I mean, I told you I like you. What else do you want me to say? If you constantly have to monitor your partner's level of love, you get distracted from attunement and responsiveness, which good sex needs. You won't be flexible. You won't coordinate your response. If you're anxious, you will lose the ability to lead and to follow, no matter what position you're in. It gets in the way. Attachment goals and perspectives even haunt sexual fantasies. They're very, very fascinating. Because, by the way, everyone has fantasies, even married people. Even married people wildly in love, they still have fantasies. But Gert Birnbaum did a great study. And he just asked for diaries about fantasies, right? So it was interesting, man. Anxious people, what were their sexual fantasies like? Anxious people, men and women, fantasize about being their partner being very affectionate in bed. They fantasize about seeing their partners yearning for them. They fantasize about being reassured, about being told how loved they are. Oh, my fantasy is I'm on a secluded beach with my boyfriend, and he's caressing me and telling me how much he loves me. Okay, if you're anxious, that's kind of part of it. That's what you fantasize about. And if you ask about your lover's fantasies, you'll see what they really need, what they really want to. That's an easy way to do it, if you can get an honest answer. Avoidant men and women, they always fantasize about acting in a aggressive way, in a alienated way. So if you ask, you read these studies, what's your sexual fantasy? A guy will say, if he's avoidant, I'm at a party and there's 3 girls and I just take them as my own, and they're enjoying it so much. Performance, very important. You have to see them enjoying it. It says, look how great I am, and they go on and on and on and on about that's their fantasy. Rarely mention cuddling, not a lot of snuggling in their fantasies. Usually it's just dominating the other person, and just seeing that they're enjoying it, and this shapes our imagination. Dan Brown came up with the ideal parent figure protocol. He died last year, but I learned most of what I do from him. He said all attachment problems, are failures of the imagination. Our imagination, how we imagine ourselves, other people, what love is supposed to be like, will affect how we think, will shape our thoughts, So when an anxious person, like a sexual fantasy for an anxious person, when they feel very anxious, when they get very anxious, they start having fantasies of themselves as humiliated, as being utterly helpless. I knew a guy, a very anxious guy, and he's just like, he's getting upset, and his fantasy was, this only happens when his partner criticizes him, and he feels the relationship's in danger, and at that point, he goes back to this helpless state, like, she just undressed me, tied me to the bed, and I was completely helpless, and she was in charge, and I had to say that I'm a good slave to your desires, or whatever people do, I don't know. But you can see how how the imagination works. So anxious people have a hard time making requests. And it's like, why not? Well, it's almost like, I want to make this request. Please call me if you're going to be late. Please don't do whatever. It's almost like I feel the power drained from me. I almost feel helpless. Like, I can't make this request. I don't have the right. And do you see that? That's the exact same thing that's going on in the bedroom. You know, being helpless, feeling helpless, only flip towards pleasure. Avoidant people, you know, even in their fantasies, but the more stress they feel in the relationship, the more aloof they become, the more remote, even in their fantasies, the more invulnerable. So oftentimes in a relationship, when you're getting too close to an avoidant, all of a sudden they almost get hyper confident. You know, avoidants usually come off as very confident, but they get this confidence and they start actually demeaning you, criticizing, you know, just being invulnerable, like saying, do anything to you, you know, just saying kind of hurtful things, you know. And so their fantasies will be like, you know, when you're very stressed, I mean, they're like, the girl in the library, I just grabbed her, I threw her on the table, and da-da-da, and this girl was watching, and they loved it, and everything. It's like, oh, okay, that's fine. I think that'd be rather alienated if, you know, you just grab a girl, don't even say hi to her, but okay. I mean, what a ridiculous fantasy, you know, it's fantasy. But when they feel very stressed, to compensate, they have to feel invulnerable. And that's also why a lot of avoidant guys learn all these weird sexual techniques, you know, and I'll, you know, like I said, I used to be in some classes for them, and they want to know how to do X, Y, and Z. And why? Who cares? Who cares? They do it all just so they can feel powerful. Sex is really about power, oftentimes, because inside they feel very small. They feel very small. So why would she stay with me? She will only stay with me if I know how to give her a full body orgasm that lasts 8 days. You know, you're pretty insecure if you gotta go those lengths. You know. The attachment style influences how the sex affects the relationship too. That's important because inevitably in every relationship there will be sexual failures. There will be sexual disappointments. Now, it's never happened with me, but I hear from other couples it happens. And that, how we deal with that, how we experience it, will define our overall relationship, you know. So in Birnbaum's study, how relationships were affected by good or bad sex the previous night, you found that for anxious people, anxious attachment, it was amplified. Because for an anxious person, they believe the sex is an indicator of how good the relationship is. That's not true. But in their mind, it feels true. I get if the sex is good, the relationship is good in their minds, regardless of what's happening. So if it's bad sex, the next day, then they'll report like, well, the next day I was very grumpy, I was kind of bitchy, I yelled at my girlfriend, my boyfriend, and I just felt like the relationship's not in a good place. You know. And I'm like, oh, what happens when the sex is good? Oh, all of a sudden when the sex is good, the next day, they're filled with confidence for the relationship. My faith is restored in him and what we're doing. And now I really believe he loves me. And now I'm very affectionate. I'm playing with him. Well, that puts a lot of pressure, first of all, on men, because they see how edgy women will get. You know, if it's bad and you're an anxious person, men and women, you'll see, like, boy, see, bad sex, my partner's really grumpy the next day. That puts a lot of pressure, like, sex better be great every friggin' time, you know. And if the sex is bad, they'll actually think the next day, anxious people, oh, I'm not even sure they love me. Oh, he said she turned me down tonight. Maybe I don't feel loved. And then you don't feel loved, then you feel more impotent and more powerless. It's kind of a circle, you know. Avoidant attachment, on the other hand, it dampens the effect of physical intimacy. Usually physical intimacy will make you a little bit closer, will aid you, But people with avoidant sex and their partner are just completely disconnected psychologically, Avoidants just dismiss the significance of sex. I mean, whoever it is, if it's an avoidant male, the girl will be like, oh, last night was so great. And I'm like, what are you bringing that up for? Yeah, it was great. And what? And maybe tonight won't be so great. Why are you bringing it up? Or if the sex has been really bad and she wants to say something, I don't know, maybe there's something wrong with it. What? No. Sex has zero emotional effect on anyone ever. Case closed. And avoidants really won't understand, But notice in both cases, with the avoidant and the anxious, the satisfaction is constricted. Both suffer in different ways. The anxious partner is preoccupied with being loved. And the avoidant partner is preoccupied with staying detached. Both fight against intimacy. Worrying, being distracted, that does not make for fulfilling sex, The sealed off sex, it can be very erotic, but it's empty. Soulless sex for comfort can be very soothing, but it's really not that erotic, It really isn't. The most satisfying and orgasmic sex is synchronous. It's when you two are in sync, when both partners are securely attached, What does that look like? It's the same thing in and out of the bedroom. A secure bond, you see it, is by emotional openness and responsiveness. You see how people are in public, so, watch two people how they eat dinner. Are they emotionally open and responsive? That's how they are in bed, And there's a feedback loop, for instance, though. Like, if you're having very good sex, that often can lead to better communication, That can. And vice versa. So if the sex is bad, well, the best way to fix that is emotional connection. It makes a big difference because that better connection will lead to more focused attention, which leads to greater arousal and attunement, pleasure, satisfaction, The sex is most rewarding when both partners can express their needs and preferences, You don't see much of that, unfortunately, on TV, in the movies. You don't even know communication was part of sex. I mean, I've talked to people. Do you talk? No. You just go in there and, it works. You can do it. But in a long-term relationship, there ought to be quite a bit of talking about this, even during. Really, it should be playful. But that would make for weird TV. They don't communicate. Sex in the movies is just kind of a dreamlike experience. Partners, they don't even talk. They just instinctively come together and know exactly what the other wants, Real world sex is a lot of talking, laughter, And if you are secure, you're not anxious, you can access the richness of your own sexuality, Because when you feel safe in a relationship, you feel this guy, this girl is never leaving me. It's so obvious they love me. We're so together. Whew. So I'm protected from rejection. I'm protected. And feeling protected gives me the freedom to explore, to be adventurous, to really get vulnerable, whatever. If you trust that your partner's going to be there for you, you can just relax. You can just let go. Let go. You don't have to worry about rejection. You don't have to worry about being embarrassed, doing the wrong thing. Boy, safety. The safer someone feels, the more willing they will be to have sex with you. Safety. How do you feel safe? Well, if you can look into your partner's head, you know exactly what they're thinking. You know what they're about. In other words, that person has opened up and shared their vulnerability, and that emotional openness and the desire to express love, that goes hand in hand with physical pleasure in bed. you know? Yeah. You know, it is a circle, your emotional connection and what happens in the bedroom. They do feed each other. A strong emotional bond leads to good sex, which in turn to a stronger emotional bond. And the reverse is true too. A weak connection leads to unfulfilling intimacy, which further weakens the connection, you know? So that may be one reason unhappy partners, when they do the surveys, distressed partners, 70% of them will say bad sex is what is making this relationship so miserable, you know. Now, when the relationship's good, less than a quarter credit the good sex with why the relationship is so good, you know. It does have, you know, even though I don't think it's the most important thing, it does have some importance. And the reason is because sex actually can help the relationship. The emotional, that sounds obvious, but I mean, good sex, it can overcome minor misattunements. And even more serious difficulties, you know, during the day, you say this, they ignored you, you said that, they didn't catch this, you thought this was funny, they didn't laugh, da-da-da-da. But if you have loving sex that night, it kind of repairs those minor cuts and bruises, you know. And that emotional platform, that trust and safety that you build in the bedroom, that's what you should be doing, building that trust and safety. Over the years, it becomes very solid. And when it becomes very solid, this kind of sex in sync, this secure sex, that helps glue some of the crumbling edges, you know, it can soften a lot of things. With the insecure, you see the opposite happen. You know, for the avoidant, there's no emotional foundation to build on. Yeah, sealed off sex, that doesn't permit an emotional place to be constructed. And attached people, there's a base, but it's very flimsy, you know, because sex that's very comforting can a little bit cover over the cracks and gaps, you know, and kind of stabilize the relationship for a minute. But as it goes on, if you're having sex just for comfort, those cracks will widen until the edifice comes down. It'll be a little more stable than an avoidant, but not much more, you know. In fact, see, not just in the bedroom, everything you say about sex, you should be able to say about the relationship. The most relationship damaging interaction is between two partners who avoid emotional engagement, you know. Avoid, you know, oh, how's your day? Fine. This happened, that happened. Good. You know, that feels awful. I mean, if you just didn't even say hello to each other, even if you were angry at each other, at least you sensed each other, you know? And if that's how you are in the bedroom, sex becomes transactional, you know, transaction. It doesn't promote emotional intimacy since both partners are, you know, focused on satisfying their own urges, you know? Another pair you see is the avoidant man with an anxious woman. Very, 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 very common. And the studies kind of show why this doesn't work. Avoidant men, they report having less sex as their partners express more anxiety and more need. Okay. Well, you see what happens. She pushes for sex as reassurance. She's anxious. And that makes the avoidant uncomfortable, and so draws even further away, which makes her even more anxious to get close, which makes him even further. And I mean, forget about it. I mean, it's brutal, and anxious and avoidant. Very hard to make it work, you know. And he's going to feel like this sex also is a demand. I need you to fix me. Oh, the horror. Two anxious people, when they get together, yeah, well, oftentimes, usually there is a lot of sex, you know. Why? They both have fears, and they're both trying to get their fears down, you know. But they're just so preoccupied with their own individual concerns that they're not able to respond the way the other person wants. And they wind up less trustful, and sex just makes them more doubtful, you know. You hear anxious people say, like, well, if he really loved me, he would say something sweet to me. If he really loved me, he wouldn't just be so aggressive. He wouldn't start in like that. If he really loved me, he would hold me afterwards, Did you ask him? No? Okay. Guys are dumb. I don't know what to tell you. They ain't that bright. You got to tell them, They're not born with this knowledge. And with men, anxious men, you hear all the time, like, oh my God, she's, the performance, like, I can't say anything to her about sex because she gets upset and it's so important to her. And, like, really just maintaining erection. I read all these manuals, A secure person with an anxious person is not that bad. That's not that bad. You can make that work, I will say just a couple things in general about long-term relationships. First of all, we are monogamous, naturally. I was shocked at that. I don't know why. I just thought that was like some birds and swans, but people? No. The science is in. It's very solid. We're wired to prefer mating and bonding with one partner for long term. Polyamory, short-term hookups, those just aren't the strategies for most humans, male or female. You're just not built that way, You got oxytocin, it surges through your brain, you got a heightened emotional connection, like at an orgasm, And believe it or not, just thinking about your lover can release oxytocin, Though you do have to think about them, And that reduces stress. It makes you calmer. And thinking about that person makes me go, oh, now I'm even more connected to them. And oxytocin is now called the molecule of monogamy because oxytocin is most felt in secure, singular relationships. That's why they're stronger, The problem with like dating multiple people, and morally, I couldn't care less. I'm just telling you what the science says, and make your own decision. This is most people. If it's not you, okay. But they have these relationships, and I've had clients, and they're worried. My partner went out with another guy, or whatever. Boy, it's like the fifth time. I shouldn't be jealous. I have no right to. Oh, well, yeah, I don't know. I think you should be jealous. I'd be jealous. I can do that. Because any time you feel lust, any simple sexual arousal, automatically triggers attachment and bonding responses. Sex makes you bonded. Period. Okay? And that's why that fact, along with oxytocin, explains why adulterous one-night stands, the whole swinging scene, polyamory, they ultimately don't work so well, Your spouse who's cheating on you, you can say anything like, oh, it's just sex, Polyamorous couples I know are usually very ethical, and they put down these very boundaries. And those boundaries are supposed to prevent the other person from getting emotionally attached, just trying to separate sex from everything else. Like, well, okay, you can hook up, but no kissing, no cuddling, don't meet outside, da-da-da-da, And it's like, it's I don't know. It's like the Titanic and sinking. You're just like moving chairs around. It's go ahead, but nature has designed us that physical closeness inexorably slips into bonding and caring. Sex hooks us into relationships. And the truth is that when people do have affairs, it's not because they're naturally inclined to, It's not that, evolutionarily we have multiple mates. Like, believe me, I know the science extremely well. And I read Sex at Dawn. I know that book, which got laughed out of the Academy. But when you do cheat or when someone has an affair, it doesn't mean that that's their natural state. Usually means the relationship has deteriorated so far that that person is unbearably lonely. It's not satisfied and then cheats. It's usually unbearably lonely, It's usually because your inherent bond with your partner is weak. Maybe it doesn't feel safe. I don't know, And the other thing you can remember with sex monogamy is they say, well, that passion, you can't sustain it over years. However, many very good studies for secure partners show that that thrill can indeed last. Not the explosive lust of first infatuation. 18 months later, that's gone, But still, the deeper exhilaration, that deeper thing. That's why one-night stands are so awful. It's not satisfying, but it is that deeper being vulnerable and available actually makes the sex hotter. That's what people say, because secure lovers have the capacity to be playful and to be adventurous throughout the relationship, and so the more safe, and I've talked to many women who have told me they never experienced orgasms until after age 50. How? Well, because they had to be with a guy for like 10 years or 15 years before they finally truly felt comfortable to allow themselves to feel that pleasure or to ask for whatever. So what I'm saying is that the long-term relationships are actually associated with much more satisfying sex. A woman in Libido, about 30% of women say they have very little or no desire for sex, even if they're married. About half that, 15% of men report feeling little desire. Usually in men, lack of libido, it's always about illness, usually, about heart disease, diabetes, something, In women, you don't need a physical explanation, and most studies show that they have no libido, and yet their vaginal tissues still show physical signs of arousal. But it doesn't make them feel desire, even though the body's working fine. Why don't we have female Viagra? Because they take it, and it doesn't do anything. Physically, they're already good. They're already, it's something psychological. And much more so than men, women's sexuality appears to depend on the quality of the relationship, more than the actual sex, like how satisfying. And so, for a long time, psychologists would not have used like a linear method, basically how men are. See, get aroused, have sex. And it's like, no, sex for women, it's a feedback loop. It includes relationship satisfaction, emotional intimacy, a previous sexual activity. All these things influence. And women, for instance, often start neutral, whereas men, when we start what we're feeling, it's usually neutral. And often they move into desire as a result of sexual cues from their partner, So they say women's sexuality is often more responsive than agenic. They don't have agency. They're responding, It's a reaction to someone else's sexual interest, And if that's true, then, as a man, you can understand why a woman wants to be held, wants to be whispered to, wants you to come on to her more slowly, Yeah. So if you want to know, just two quick little exercises you can do if you want to know where you're at with all this, is there's a couple questions you can ask yourself. And you can rate 1 to 10. But if you're curious, like, what's sex about for you? Think about this, just ask yourself, do I have sex? Do I want to get close and feel connected to my lover? Is that true? How true? How about, are you someone who just wants to turn them on, get the thrill and the pleasure? Is that the reason you have sex? One of them? Is it, I just want tension release. Like, geez, just let me relax and let go. Probably a more anxious person, Or, I have sex, I want to feel special and cared for. That's the big thing for me, just to know that I'm special and cared for. Or, do I have sex to show my love for them? And know that I'm cared by them, you know. Sometimes people have sex just to know they're potent and still virile, you know. Those are the reasons, okay, the ones I just laid out. You can listen to them again and pick out, you know, scale 1 to 10, how true, how false. You can show your partner, and it will really clarify what exactly you're trying to get out of it. And I would discuss with your partner, well, what are our motives for having sex? Why? Because the best sex combines all the factors of both partners. You know, this partner wants to be held, this partner just wants this, that. Well, you can do both. You can do both. It can be mutually satisfying when everyone's motives and desires are met. That's an easy way to really make things more safe and open. The other experiment you kind of do is just to examine your own sense of security. You bring up a moment, kind of get into the meditative posture, go into yourself, sit quietly, and bring up images of 2 or 3 times when you felt really loved by others. Right. Really like being like, oh, my mom, oh, my grandpa gave me that, oh, I had friends surprise me on my birthday, or a boyfriend, or whatever. 2 or 3 moments. And then imagine yourself in a sexual situation where you feel entirely safe, cherished, accepted. Yeah. And ask yourself, feeling this way, what would I do or ask for that's different from how I usually respond? If I felt that way, Or, if I could be emotionally as well as physically naked, what would I do different, It's kind of a discovery. And then you write in 1 sentence, and that's kind of the point. That's one of your needs that perhaps have been unmet. Anyway, if you guys have any questions or comments, please leave a comment. I'll try to get back to it. But I appreciate you guys listening.